Psalm 23 has been said to be one of the most popular and most well-known psalms in all of history. Perhaps you are one of the many people who learned this psalm and memorized it as a child, or someone in Sunday school taught it to you, or perhaps a loved one wanted to pass on the faith to you with the words of the psalm. It's often read at funerals and memorial services and can provide comfort to its listeners. It begins with a helpful claim that the Lord is our shepherd, that the Lord provides. There is an assurance of hope and of trust that can move us forward in life. God sustains and provides for God's flock over and over again. We can remember the freeing of the Israelites from Egypt and their return from exile. And while much has changed in the world since the writing of this psalm, there are some things, I believe, that have remained the same. Our human consciousness. Like the psalmist, we long to be reassured when we are distressed, don't we? And the image of God as a shepherd, one who leads us, cares for us, and provides for us, providing for our needs just as the shepherd leads through the gate, cares for and meets the needs of the flock. This can be as comforting to us today as it was to the original author and the original listeners as well. But I think there's another truth as well, and that is that when we go through darkness, through the difficult times, through the challenges of our life, which we know will come, through those uncertain times when things don't go as we planned or we hope or we expect, when the disappointing news comes, those times when we or a loved one faces a detour, the challenge for us is not that God will provide for our needs. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But rather, the challenge for us, I think, is truly believing and trusting that God will do so. When confronted with the demands of daily life and the struggles to trust God will provide us and lead us, it is very real and present in our lives. We have a hard time trusting that God will, in fact, keep us from wanting. So how do we strengthen our trust? How do we listen for and even recognize the shepherd's voice in our own lives? In today's world, it seems the voices of fear, worry, uncertainty, the challenges and pressures of family life and of work life, the relationship struggles, or the health concerns that continually keep us awake at night, those are the voices that speak the loudest to us and drown out, I think, the voice of the shepherd. With so many things and voices vying for our attention, I think we have lost sight of a spiritual practice that helps us to hear the shepherd's voice, and that is the practice of Sabbath. During my recent sabbatical experience, some of you are aware that my theme was Sabbath, and I was hoping to read and learn more about the Sabbath and what that meant, and also take time to practice the Sabbath for myself. Even though I wasn't working here at the church during my sabbatical, I was quite surprised to discover that other things took up my time that I would normally have been spending here. It was very easy to get distracted by the things that were right in front of me. I realized that my time and attention that I tried to put to Sabbath, it went well sometimes, and other times it was a real struggle. The roots of the word Sabbath mean to stop, to desist, to receive, and to embrace the gift of rest. And it has been said that the practice of Sabbath is like the practice of taking a refuge. Could it be, I wonder, that not stopping to rest, not stopping to pay attention to our own inner life, not stopping to listen for the still small voice of the shepherd, actually corrodes our trust in God's provision. And we do believe, perhaps, that we are in want. We know we depend on rest for our health and for our vitality. So why is it so hard to embrace rest? Why is it hard to practice the Sabbath and disconnect from the whirlwind of life around us, even if it is just for a moment? To breathe deeply in the rhythms of the presence of God in us and around us. For so many of us, it is the demands of work life or family life that get in the way of Sabbath rest, even when we have really good intentions. Think about vacation for a moment. How many of you have been looking for that wonderful vacation? You're so excited, and then you return exhausted after your vacation. Has that ever happened to anybody? How often do we realize we don't get the rest that even we might set out to try and find? Some of us may even feel guilt or shame for making time to rest. Our culture affirms productivity and action and accomplishment over rest, doesn't it? Doing something is better than doing nothing, we are told. I remember my parents telling me that as a child. This is ingrained in our culture. But I wonder, is taking Sabbath rest really doing nothing? When we make time for Sabbath rest, we need to remember that the benefit is not just for ourselves. Our spirits and our souls need it desperately, I think, in today's culture. But when we take this time, when we are rested and refreshed and we are restored, guess what? We naturally and more generously are present for those in our life, aren't we? For our families, our friends, for our workplaces. Just think about how different a situation in your life can look after sleeping on it for the night, when you wake up in the morning. The act of physical rest is vital to us, and it's part of the creation of our 24-hour day that we are invited to rest. But there is more to rest than just the physical act of sleeping. As people of faith, Sabbath rest is just as important for our spiritual life and for our own souls. And according to the psalmist today, God is the initiator of this rest. Here again, these words, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." In preparation for today, I learned that this second verse, a more literal translation from the Hebrew, reads this way: "He continually causes me to lie down in green pastures." Continually, an ongoing exchange. And I think the implication here is that we do not always have the sense to know when it is best to lie down and rest in order for us to find that soul refreshment and restoration. And so, sometimes life forces us to slow down. I was just talking to someone after the 9 o'clock service who shared that after their spouse had retired, the body began to break down. The body finally had a chance to exhale. Thankfully, the person is okay, but suddenly there were some health issues from not resting. According to the psalmist, we are invited, and sometimes life happens in ways that force us to stop and slow down. And how hard is it when we're faced with these realities? How hard is it when our life forces us to slow down and to take the time to lie down? For most of us, it is a terribly challenging experience, and these life moments, of course, never come at the right time. But what happens on the other side of this discomfort, this initial discomfort and disorientation. Friends, restoration lies somewhere behind it, because God is in the business of restoration and renewal. And it is when we make space for Sabbath rest, or space is made for us, our souls are restored. For when we do not rest, it is easy to lose our way, stray off path, and we miss the quiet places that lead us to deeper wisdom, that lead us to have hope, that grant us renewal, and perhaps even reconciliation. Psalm 23, in the very next line, continues with imagery that I think helps us to understand this even more fully. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. Notice how it's the still waters that offer restoration. Wayne Mueller is an author in the book, author of a book called Sabbath, and he has said, the invitation to rest is rooted in an undeniable spiritual gravity that allows all things to rest and to settle, to find their place. There becomes a moment in our striving, he says, when more effort on our part actually becomes counterproductive, when our frantic busyness only muddies the wisdom and understanding we are trying to seek. I learned of a phrase from an ancient Chinese text, the Tao Te Ching, which asks the question, who is it that can make the muddy water clear? The answer, if allowed to remain still, the water will gradually become clear. Last week, we celebrated the renewal of our baptism here in worship, and I shared the story of how when I was on sabbatical, I did a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and I received a renewal of baptism on the edge of the Jordan River, and that after that service, I dipped my empty Coke bottle into the waters and brought some of the water back to use in our service last week for those who weren't here. What I was stunned by was the waters were muddy. The water is not clear. When this bottle rested on the table in my house, in my guest bedroom, it became crystal clear. The stillness allowed the sedimentation of the water to gather at the bottom of the bottle. We are invited to the stillness because we live here, don't we? But sometimes we need to grasp hold of the rest that God is trying to give us in our very lives. For God does God's best work, I think, when we slow down, when we take that time, when we pause, when we stop, and we rest. That is when restoration, that is when clarity, that is when renewal comes for us. And it may not come after just a brief moment, but the ongoing practice of Sabbath rest in our daily routines helps us to get there. And trusting the shepherd to care for and to lead and to provide for us can get lost when we forget that truth. Could it be that stopping and resting, that laying down leads to greater vitality, and that God sometimes leads us to this most uncomfortable place? The invitation to lay down, to experience Sabbath rest, is a gift that flows to us from God's grace. And it is the place we may encounter the living God who offers us the restoration, the new life, the wonderful gift of renewal that we long for. Mueller goes on to say in his book that Sabbath is time concentrated with our attention, our mindfulness, having those quiet forces of grace or spirit that sustain and heal us. We know that life can be anything but restful, especially this day and age after 2.5 years of living with the stress of a pandemic. Weariness and exhaustion can take center stage. So today, I'm going to make space for a few moments of Sabbath time, for us as a community of faith to sit in silence, to pause, and to rest, making space for us to listen to the shepherd's voice, the still, small voice of God. As we enter this silence, for those for whom this might be very uncomfortable, I invite you to sit and be present with the discomfort, for it can be challenging to simply be still in the quiet. I understand that, especially when we're forced to do it. For the next few moments, I invite you to sit with these questions. Where is God inviting me or making me lie down? How am I resisting rest or trusting in God, the Good Shepherd, to provide for all my needs? What needs to pass away in my life so that something else may flourish? As we enter into this time to experience the presence of God, I invite you to take a deep breath, to settle into your seat, and to close your eyes if you wish. For those watching at home, I invite you to also do the same thing. I will conclude our time of silence with prayer. Living God, the one who offers us the restoration we long for, the one whom we call Good Shepherd. Meet us in our time of weariness and uncertainty. Meet us in our time of stress and worry. Help us as we go forth from this place to make time for Sabbath rest. not just doing nothing, but to sit in your loving presence, allowing space for you to remind us of who we are and whose we are. May Sabbath rest be something you nudge us to pursue, for in doing so, the restoration and renewal we long for will surely come. In the name of the risen Christ our Lord, I pray. Amen.